choice is a third one. This seems to be a very common issue within this global educational reform movement. School choice means that we have to enhance and increase choices for parents so that they can choose the best possible school and education for their children. And this, of course, means introducing all sorts of alternative ways of running the school, like charter schools or free schools or private schools that have emerged in different parts of the world. Sweden is a very interesting example. Sweden being a system exactly like Finland 20 years ago, and now they have 15–20% of their children in private so-called free schools that England is also following. And the English secondary school experiment, where the secondary schools are turned into academies, means that by 2015, a few years, 2–3 years from now, all the secondary schools in England will be non-governmental schools. So they have lost the connection to the government and they are privatized. Okay? So this school choice issue is a very common one. And rather than school choice, we have chosen equity in our education, as our education policy. And this means, equity means that we are trying to design our school system so that children's family background would not be the most important thing that determine their educational success. This is how equity is often defined. Equity doesn't mean that everybody will learn the same or we will give everybody the same things. It actually means that we have to give everybody different things because everybody is different from background. I'll speak a little bit more about the equity in a minute, but I do think that school choice and equity are alternatives. You cannot have both of them at the same time. So you either enhance or endorse school choice, and then you have to then excuse equity, or you choose equity and then you have to do something to the school choice. So these are clearly kind of a policy alternatives. You cannot have them both. I think I couldn't probably stress the importance of equity in education more than I do here. And this has been the key policy driving idea in Finnish education for the last 40 years now. 40 years ago, when we started to build this system that we have now, the main idea was equality of educational opportunity and educational equity so that everybody would learn. And we went far beyond the rhetoric that many other countries have done. I think it's important also to know that Finland is doing quite well in many other areas, not just education. So that's why I'm saying that education is not really any miracle. That if you look at some of these things where I have benchmarked Finland's performance to the United States, you will see that whatever ranking you are looking at, almost all of these rankings always place Finland on the top 5 or somewhere there. Yeah? Particularly in the important areas like equity, equality, economy, innovation, many other things. So it seems like the whole country, the whole system is performing fairly well, and that's why education is just one element of that performance. So one of the issues here is the technological achievement, advancement in Finland. How many of you know the game called Angry Birds? How many of you play Angry Birds? You are more of you play than you know. Did you know that Angry Birds is from Finland? No? Now you do. Yeah. From this picture you also see that Finland has some of the happiest people in the world, right? So you can say, when you leave home from here, you can say that, I remember this Finnish guy saying that Finland has angry birds and happy people. Yeah? Unlike in some other countries where they have angry people but happy birds. Yeah? Often because of education. But the serious thing here is that the country is taking care of many important things fairly well, and that's why education is easier for us. So this means that New Zealand, that you have higher than OECD average performance when you are measuring what students can do in math, reading, and science, right? So I'm using a kind of an aggregate of all these measures. So you are doing better than the OECD average, but your equity, because you are on this side of the map, it means that your system is less equitable than the OECD countries on average, and that's not a good place to be. It means that in your education system, children's family background determines more their educational performance than in most other countries in the OECD, okay? Let me show you some others. Just look at Australia comes here, right? So again, higher than average performance, but the equity in Australian education system is stronger than you. So Australia is more equitable in terms of providing education evenly for everybody than New Zealand, okay? You will see that there are some outliers there, like Singapore, for example, this red and white flag there, and Norway is probably the other one. But you don't find any countries there with the low equity on the left-hand side and very high quality. And you don't find anybody who has very high equity but low quality. So interestingly, all these countries, they seem to be finding their place in kind of a path to success, yeah? This is where Finland was 40 years ago. When we started this reform, we had a very unfair education system because it was based mostly on private schools, and it was dividing people, young people like me at that time, into path to academic studies and universities, and then to those who didn't care about education. So we had a very low equity at that time, 40 years ago. And this is the group of 4 that the OECD is now calling high-performing OECD countries, and Finland is one of them. And you will easily see that the Finnish way has not been to invest in excellence or quality. Yeah? The Finnish way has been primarily enhancing and improving the equity of the system, doing many things like special education system that has been there already for 40 years. That is one of the flagships of our system. We have a very intensive early childhood development policy that is making sure that everybody has to have access to systematic daycare. And about 98% of Finnish 6-year-olds, before they go to school at the age of 7, do that. Yeah? We give free meal, free health care, dental care, counseling, all these things to all children in all schools every day. An important part of the building the equity. And we are funding our schools in a way that favors those who are working in a more difficult conditions. If you have more immigrants, children from unemployed families, special needs students, those who are not speaking Finnish as a first language, you get more resources. So this is what we called equitable way of funding the system, all right?
Are there income inequalities in Finland that are big enough that are reflected in the education system? What do you do about that sort of thing?
Well, Finland is like Sweden and Norway and Denmark regarding the income inequality. So we have one of the smallest income inequalities. New Zealand and Australia are somewhere there between the average and United States in the middle there. But you know, our system is completely publicly funded, including higher education. So we have a legislation that doesn't allow anybody to charge tuition fee for education that is leading to a degree, like typically primary or lower secondary, upper secondary, higher education. So it's all funded by public money. But we are still spending very close to the OECD average on, if you look at how expensive the education system is. So the system doesn't cost too much, and I think we have been probably able to balance somehow the cost of governing and running the system, and then getting the good quality out.
Presumably, Pasi, that schools serve their local neighbourhoods, so you would tend to find schools in fairly well-off, affluent areas and schools in not so well-off areas.
Yeah.
I presume would be a fairly similar challenge to the setup here in New Zealand, that you've got kids that are pretty challenged with their learning in certain schools, and other schools that have literate and numerate students in particular that come in from the word go.
Yeah.
And what sort of environment exists in across that continuum, and particularly in terms of the teachers that are attracted to the wide variety of schooling that you have?
How we are trying to deal with this thing is firstly having a funding system that is giving more money to those schools who have more difficult conditions, so that if your school if there are more immigrants living around here, you are likely to get more money from the city of Helsinki to have smaller classes or more staff or more resources, whatever you want to do. Then the other one, I think, is that we are systematically providing everybody, all the children in all the schools, school lunch, healthcare, dental care, counseling every day, all the schools, every class. And this is a kind of a, rather than seeing who are those who are in need, this is a kind of a systematic service for everyone. And we have a new law now, I think it was introduced this beginning of this year, that requires that every pupil between ages 7 and 16, they have to go through a comprehensive medical check in the school every year. So there's a doctor in the school that is doing this. We have two kinds of special education. One is the permanent special education, which is like a more serious thing that requires, it's not only the school and this committee that can decide. This decision of moving a child permanently into special education group or class has to be done at the level of municipality, and there's always a hearing of parents. But it's a kind of a serious, because it has consequences for this individual. It doesn't mean that this will be forever, that this can be changed. The child can be brought back to a normal class if the conditions get better. So these we have much less than the other one, that is a part-time special education, which is something that this committee can decide. And we have about 1/4 of all of our students are in this special education. And this normally can last for 8 weeks or sometimes more than this, but the assumption is that with this kind of a remedial support that they will get from the special education teacher or somebody, a specialist, these pupils can be brought back, that there's a plan.